Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. So nice to have you all here. My name is Carole Genshaft, and I'm a curator here at the Columbus Museum of Art. And it's been my privilege for many, many years to work with Aminah Robinson. So I'm thrilled that you're all here today to celebrate her life. I think all of us agree that Aminah Brenda Lynn Robinson was an extraordinary woman. She created art that is at once magical and spiritual and mystical and otherworldly. And at the same time, it's grounded in the stories of her elders and in the extensive historical research that she loved to do. In 2004, the MacArthur Foundation gave Aminah a fellowship that is known as a Genius Grant. Robert Ferris Thompson, one of the country's foremost scholars of African and African American art, agreed and called her a genius because of her offbeat phrasing of visual accents. Her use of stitching and buttons and fabrics to create rag paintings, button-beaded drawings, tapestry-like raganons, he said, is like the work of no other artist. Aminah created a distinctive visual language that is at once personal and universal, that bridges the past and the present, that links Mount Vernon Avenue here in Columbus with the marketplaces and people of Western Africa, Israel, Chile, and all the places she visited. While discussing Aminah's work could be a lifetime endeavor, today I'm going to focus on the works of art that are up in the museum today. And hopefully you've all had a chance to see some of those. These three paintings are in the forum right next door, and they probably represent portraits of the three people who were most important in Aminah's life: her father, her mother, and her son, Sidney. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them, but before I get to that, Aminah's work is just so very layered, so it's important to know even the form that it takes. And her father, the drawing, the rag painting of her father is actually, she calls a manuscript page. And to her, this was something, it was a meditation. She often did these manuscript pages, which she considered so very important, on the first and the last page of a book that happened to be blank. Before she was really had enough money to buy a lot of art materials, she would take the pages out of a book that were blank. And to her, that added an extra layer of sacredness to what she was about to do. The other two are done on pellon, and pellon is a material that you can buy in a fabric store. It's kind of stiff, and it's used to back clothes and tablecloths and curtains. The Urban Dictionary defines pellon as a secret material that's holding the world together. And I think that's really appropriate for Aminah because, in reality, it did kind of hold her work together and enabled her to do some of these most beautiful paintings, but it just seemed very appropriate for her work. The photograph was taken at East High School. This is Helen Zimmerman Robinson, her mother, her father, Leroy Robinson. Aminah is in the center here. Her younger sister, Sharon, is up here, and her older sister, Sue, is over on the left. So Aminah was extremely close with her father. He was instrumental to who she became. And he did something with her. First of all, he held down many jobs to make sure that the family had what they needed. And he never called himself an artist, but in effect, he really was. He taught her drawing skills, and he did this exercise with her that really became like a ritual. And he called it doing penetrations. And what he would do, he would have Aminah look at a scene, maybe say if she were here to look out among you, and then he'd say, look really closely, and then he'd have her close her eyes and tell everything that she saw. And then he'd have her open her eyes and say everything that she missed. And they would do that a lot. And I think Aminah was actually born with a fabulous memory. For those of you who know her, she just never quit. She remembered every person she ever met, and she could pull out facts very, very quickly. But I think this exercise really helped her concentrate. It was almost like her mind became a computer and she captured these images. It really put her in good stead when she was in certain places. You know, she always carried a sketchbook with her, but sometimes she didn't think it was, it would have been rude to sketch. So for example, when she was in New York in 1989 on a fellowship, she did a whole series of work called Homelessness in America. And she would ride the subways and look at the people on the subway train, and instead of sketching them there, she would use this system of penetrating and then go back to her apartment and draw what she had seen. Similarly, when she went to Israel on an OAC fellowship, she went to some of the very Orthodox sections of Jerusalem, or she'd go to old synagogues in Safat, where she just didn't feel comfortable sketching. But again, she'd use this technique, just look very carefully at the situation, the events, and then she would go back and sketch. So it served her very, very well. And some of you may know that Aminah had a very serious boyfriend most of her life, and his name was Leonardo da Vinci. And of course, this is a drawing by Leonardo. She talked about him all the time. But it was really, Leonardo and the other old masters really gave her a wonderful grounding in drawing. And you see that in this, what she called penetration of a Poindexter girl with umbrella. So she would use this cross-hatching technique, which many artists use. It's a very classical, traditional way to draw. And by putting lines closer together, you bring on shadows, and the areas where there are less lines, it becomes lighter. But it's also a way to kind of render, I think, emotions and tone. And she became very, very skilled at that. I don't know why that's not happening. There we go. Something else her father told her was that the world is full of art supplies, and you don't need money, and you don't have to go to a store to find them. So when she was very young, he taught her how to make paper. And they would collect paper scraps, really from the wastebasket, divide them, cut them, tear them into little pieces, make pulp, let it dry, and then it would become a surface to do art on. So for example, this is one of her handmade papers that she took with her to Africa. And those pieces of paper became, I think, even more meaningful, like the pages she tore from a book, because she made them herself, and of course they had that beautiful texture to them. He also taught her how to make hogmog. And hogmog is a sculptural material made from mud and lime and glue and leaves and sticks. And she used it in many of her three-dimensional figures, also some two-dimensional. But here you have John T. Ward transporting fugitive slaves in Columbus. So you can see how she used this mud concoction that she would actually cook up on the stove and use it as a sculptural media. She also would use things that other people threw away, boxes. She'd take them and open them up and use them as a drawing surface. This little grouping is actually a whole array of books that she made for Sidney when he was a little boy. So there are pop-up books and accordion books, and they're all made from found materials that were being discarded. The whole is in a shoebox. And then up here you see some wonderful art that she did on paper bags. She did a whole series of work called Unwritten Love Letters, actually hundreds of these. And she would get letters in the mail, she would steam them open, dye them, and then do these beautiful drawings on them, often of literary figures, civil rights leaders. And again, these two took on more meaning. She could have gone out and bought a box of new envelopes, but that wouldn't have had the same feel. She loved getting letters from people and using them because she thought that imbued them with this extra layer of meaning. The other thing that her father did was imbue her with this love of books. I know some of you were here to hear Michael Rosen. It's true. Aminah really saw the world as in a book form. Her rag-and-ons, which I'll talk about in a moment, she called button-beaded pop-up books. She just thought that the form of a book could encompass really anything that the imagination could dream up. So she did all kinds of books. This is a book that was full of wood carvings. This one had lithographs and carvings. She did original, one-of-a-kind beaded button artist books. This is one where she made her own paper and started filling it in. Her rag-and-ons are full of books. They have pockets with books, and there's books within books. This was a project she did called Pages in History about abolitionists who operated in Columbus, Ohio. She did that with the Logan Elm Press at Ohio State. And here she is with one of her little button beaded books. Often she'd make these books and then fill them in later. And then, of course, she did the 7 published books that you see here on the bottom. And for Aminah, she loved these projects, but it was very, very different. If you were here when Michael was talking, we all know that Aminah did not know from right angles. There are very few works of art that are square or rectangular. She really didn't work that way. She didn't think that way. But when you're doing the original art for a book, the publisher tells you exactly what size it has to be. It has to be consistent on each page, each drawing. So this was a real challenge for her, but one she really loved. So she did 2 books with Michael Rosen, Pompey Walker, and Elijah's Angel, which we actually have one of the works from the original works from that book is out in the hall in our Page Turners exhibition. And then she did 2 on her own that she wrote and illustrated. One is called The Teachings, which has these beautiful drawings that illustrate, I think there's like 32 or 36 African-American spirituals, all in the form of a woman, and they're really quite beautiful. And then, of course, A Street Called Home, which she wrote and illustrated. And then she worked with a number of other artists, authors, but she always picked just the right technique and media to express whatever story was part of that book. To Be a Drum, I'll talk about in a moment, because that's also, some of those pages are in the Forum exhibition. And then something else that was really, really important. Her father really, really encouraged her to listen to her elders. And I think this is something really was uniquely Aminah. As a very young child, she would sit and listen and write down notes really as soon as she could write, and she would record their stories. So her father's aunt, Cornelia, whose African name was Themba, lived in the south end of Columbus, and she lived to be 105. So Aminah was 17 when Themba passed away. And her father made it a habit of weekly having Aminah go and talk with Themba, and she would go to her house and write down these stories. Themba actually was born in Angola and was imprisoned, survived the Middle Passage, and was enslaved on Sapelo Island, Georgia. And so she had lots of stories to tell. After the emancipation, she came north to Tennessee and then finally made it to Columbus, Ohio. And really part of Aminah's life work has been to preserve those stories. And then, and so these are 2 paintings of Themba. Themba made quilts, and some of the quilts she gave to Aminah's family, and Aminah and some of them were just in little pieces, really in threads, but Aminah carefully treasured those and put them in work that she considered to be very important. And then on her mother's side, her mother's oldest brother was Alvin Zimmerman, and Uncle Alvin must have been quite a character because he had great stories that Aminah illustrated and documented throughout her life. And this is Uncle Alvin over here. Aminah often wore Uncle Alvin's coat. It was kind of a big coat with pockets, and she just loved that coat. I think even after he passed away, it really made her connect with him. And now, Aminah's mother was not so hot to have her be an artist. Unlike her father, she really didn't think that was a worthy career to pursue. And she also really didn't think talking to your elders for hours was necessarily that good. Her mother was the disciplinarian in the family. Aminah used to talk about how her mother and the other women in Poindexter were very strong and you didn't mess with them. And they also, every mother in that community would kind of watch every child, so the kids couldn't get away with very much. But the thing that Aminah really respected her mother, and she really was thrilled to learn these skills that her mother gave her about needlework. So her mother taught her to sew, You see this is Aminah's work on this side. She taught her how to hook a rug, how to do embroidery and crochet. But the thing that really she had all the girls do is button work. It was something they had done in their family where you would take buttons and attach them to cloth, and they'd kind of become tablecloths. And I don't know whether it was to keep hands busy or just teach more sewing skills, but this was something that, of course, became very, very important in Aminah's work. Aminah said the button work is an act of connecting, an act of love. And if you think about it, those buttons that she collected, perhaps for many of you who would leave jars of buttons on her doorstep, each one of those represented the person who had worn the clothes that had those buttons on them. So again, that became another layer of her work and another point of kind of sacredness and connection. So, Aminah always says that she knew she wanted to be an artist when she was 3 years old. And I think by the time she was probably 7 or 8 or 10, as she is in this photograph, she was an artist. This is a watercolor she did when she was 8 years old. And you can see that talent already. And here are a number of other ones from those years when she was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. This one is great because it's a self-portrait. So when she was about 10, maybe 8, she entered a Thanksgiving contest, and you had to draw a turkey. One of the television stations sponsored it, and so she won. And she went to get her prize. She went to the TV station, and the prize was a dog, which she named Charcoal. And the family had to get special dispensation because Poindexter Village at the time didn't allow dogs, but they did allow Charcoal. And you see already at this early sign, she's already got a sketchbook in her hand, which she really never put down, always had a sketchbook with her. But again, you can just see that talent at such a young age is definitely evident. And this is Sidney, her son, when he was about 11 years old. I think the elders, Uncle Alvin and Themba, really connected Aminah with her ancestors and her past. And for Aminah, Sidney, her son, really connected her with the present and the future. And that's kind of, you can see that in the books in his hands that she's depicted him with. Some are the Bible, some are about the pyramids of Egypt, about the far distant past. But then he's holding a book that says, "What do I want to be?" So it was really looking forward. This is another early drawing she did of Sidney, and some photographs of Sidney. Sidney was about a year old at this point. And this is a raganon that I'll tell you about in more detail, but these raganons are huge pieces. This one is between 40 and 50 feet long. And as you can see, she started at the year Sidney was born in 1967, and she kept adding to it. And when we did our big retrospective exhibition of her in 2002, symphonic poem, actually at the end of the